Hi, and welcome to PHQ, Questions from the Personality Hacker Community. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And let's get right to our question this week.
Hi, Joel and Antonia. I'm an ENFJ female married to an ISFP male. I love him very much, but we rub up against each other in so many ways. Would it be possible to have a podcast about the dynamics between these two types? I sometimes think that it would be easier if I was the ISFP and he was the ENFJ. A lot of my friends are also ESFJs. Only one letter is changed, but obviously it alters the functions. Could you tell me more about the differences and how the two types can interact well? Many thanks.
Hey, thanks for the question. So what I actually hear in this question are two different questions. As an ENFJ, you're asking, how do I relate to my ISFP husband? We're connected. How do I, some of the different personality traits there. And then also some of my friends are EFJs, but they're ESFJs. They're not ENFJs. So I know that's in the dichotomy of intuitive and sensor split. That's only one letter off, but it certainly shows up in a lot of different ways. So I have a two-part question here. That's what I'm hearing you ask when you ask this.
Yeah. I want to take the first part, the idea of an ENFJ and ISFP pair bond partnership, a marriage in this case. And I think that it is relevant, the genders are relevant, but I think right now I mostly want to focus on the car model for each of these types, or what's technically called the cognitive function stack, because I think that that's pretty relevant. There's a couple different things that I could see potentially coming up in this relationship based entirely on functions. Now, obviously, your guys' relationship is your own. It's going to be based on your shared values and interests. It's going to be based on your each of your individual levels of development and then the level of development of the relationship itself. So I'm not trying to indicate that knowing your cognitive function stack for each of the types is going to somehow be bulletproof and the only answer you need. However, it might help give a little bit of insight into what's going on just kind of like a mind wiring level. So the first thing that I notice about these two types, the first thing that comes up for me is that you're both leading with a feeling process. ENFJs lead with extroverted feeling, or what we call harmony, and ISFPs lead with introverted feeling, or what we call authenticity. So they're both feeling processes that are dominant or drivers for you guys, but they're different styles of feeling. They have different what's called attitudes. One of the styles is an extroverted attitude, and the other one is an introverted attitude. When two people lead with a feeling process, I've noticed that there's a lot of emotional simpatico that goes on. There is a respect for each other's emotional experience. Just on an underlying, like a fundamental level, when somebody leads with feeling, they understand how much the feeling experience impacts an individual, and so they have a tendency to hold more space for it.
They honor it. It's an honoring thing when it comes to feelings.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's a good thing. However, I've also noticed that when people lead with a feeling process, and especially when one is extroverted and the other one is introverted, the kinds of feeling that are valued and honored are a little different. Extroverted feeling is honoring primarily the emotional experience of everybody. That's why it focuses so much on trying to get everybody's needs met. It's a group decision, and because its etymology is about paying attention to basically social dynamics and how everybody's engaged with each other on an emotional level, then it ends up becoming, it's extroverted, and it's a judging process, technically called a judging process. And so how things should go, how things should be, where we put our evaluations and what's important to us ends up becoming about these social rules that we create and honor, unspoken social contracts. And so it's almost like a removed from an emotional component a lot of times. When you're making a decision using the extroverted feeling process, it's more about what's going to get the job done and getting everybody's needs met, which is a little different than necessarily honoring the individual's emotion in the moment. Now, you can also do that too if that is the need, but that's not really where the focus goes. The focus goes on these social contracts, the things that we have built together over time to create a system of getting our needs met. Introverted feeling, on the other hand, which is what ISFPs lead with, is more of the individual human experience. Introverted feeling, what we've nicknamed it authenticity, because it's all about what's going on and what's real for you as an individual. So with the introverted feeling list of criteria of what's important, it's all about what's happening in the moment right here, right now for you. Now, the contracts that we've built over time to honor each other's needs versus the individual human experience and what I'm feeling right here, right now, are sometimes linked up and other times diametrically opposed. Sometimes you have to put your emotions on the back burner in order to honor the emotional experience of the group, the collective. And sometimes the group experience or the collective and the emotional experience of everyone and having to put yourself aside or your emotions aside is intolerable to the authenticity process. Like, why would you make that choice? Why do I have to change or pretend that my emotional experience is different just because it's inconvenient for everybody else and getting their needs met? So then there's a conversation around the awkwardness of the situation, or whether or not the person who's using introverted feeling is being selfish, whether or not the extroverted feeling person is being bossy or commanding, trying to get an end game accomplished, but at the cost of the individual. So while there is a general honoring of the emotional experience, if the attitude of the direction of the evaluation goes a different way, which is basically a fancy word of saying if one's introverted and the other one's extroverted, then you're going to have differing opinions on which emotional experience should be taking, it should be at the top rung. One's going to say all of us, and the other one's going to say the individual. So already we have some potential fodder for arguments. Already we have some potential fodder for clashing. And because it is a feeling process, both people generally tend to rely on their personal emotional experience, meaning that what they're convicted about or what they're passionate about, that generally becomes the thing that's the most persuasive to them. So you can have big blow up, knockout or knockdown, drag out fights because you've got two feeling processes at odds with each other and trying very passionately by maybe amping up the passion, trying to be persuasive through conviction and passion. You've got two people who are trying very hard to convince the other person of their evaluation and what they've determined is right by increasing the levels of passion. And so now you have fights, or at least that could be an easy recipe for that.
Yeah, the other thing to remember about both of these processes is an ENFJ, you're leading with that harmony process or extroverted feeling. As an ISFP, your husband is leading with authenticity or introverted feeling. Both of those feeling processes are decision-making processes. And these are the primary way you show up, both of you show up to the world, is from a decision-making frame. So even though you may not always be decisive, usually you are pretty good. Both of you have a sense of the decision you want to make around how maybe your husband feels personally about something and how you feel collectively about how the group or the experience in a social setting is happening. And so that can also amp up the conflict because both of you are, it's not from a perceiving or a learning or an information gathering perspective, it's from a decision-making perspective. And that conflict can also be exacerbated because both of you have those functions in the primary part of your personality. You show up to the world leading with those instead of having like one of you having it as a secondary or auxiliary process or a co-pilot process.
Yeah, and you and I have a little bit of a taste of this as an ENFP and an ENTP.
Yeah.
Because you use introverted feeling as your auxiliary process or co-pilot, and I use extroverted feeling as my tertiary or my 10-year-old process. And so harmony shows up for me in like sometimes excellent and other times highly bastardized ways. But I have noticed moments where my extroverted feeling or harmony process gets a little like frustrated with your introverted feeling or authenticity process in moments when, like, say the kids are involved. Like you're feeling something in the moment, something is important to you, you have a conviction around how you think something should go. And I'm trying to do what appears expedient for the entire family. And in those moments, I'll frequently think that you're just being selfish. I'm like, why are you being so selfish? A lot of times, though, when I trust your introverted feeling process, like the way that you believe something should pan out, most of the time you're right. Now, of course, your auxiliary introverted feeling process trumps my tertiary extroverted feeling process because it is a strength for you, while mine is not a strength for me.
Trumps it in strength, not in I'm always right.
Yes. Well, exactly. It trumps it, like it's a more reliable source of good quality judgment and decision making than my extroverted feeling is, because I should be using introverted thinking. But I have noticed those moments, and I can only imagine if both those processes were taking a dominant position, how often there would be fights on what is the right thing to do. How often the ENFJ, I mean, I don't know in this particular situation, but I could very easily see the ENFJ thinking the ISFP is just completely self-absorbed or possibly very self-centered. And I could see the ISFP feeling like the ENFJ might just be bossy or barking orders or doesn't care about the individual, might actually be like in some ways like dishonoring them. Like basically attacking them. I could see them entering a dynamic where if things got really bad, that's probably the end of that line. One person seeing the other person as like a commandant who's always on them and nagging, and the other person seeing the ISFP, like that would be how the ISFP would see the ENFJ, and the ENFJ would see the ISFP as being like maybe self-centered or self-absorbed or lazy or whatever other word that they would use. So I could see it getting really bad, but I could also see it being really beautiful. I could see at the highest levels, extroverted feeling using that unique understanding that introverted feeling has on what the actual needs of the family are by taking the subjective experience, because that extroverted feeling process can sometimes fall back on templates, assumptions of need, right? Like the kids need this and this and this, and we need this and this and this in order to create this template of what people's needs are. And what's great about honoring introverted feeling is that introverted feeling will oftentimes have an insight that the things we think people need are not actually accurate. This is what the person actually needs. So extroverted feeling using introverted feeling as deeper insight into how to get people's needs met, like the real authentic needs. And vice versa. I could see introverted feeling being able to connect with extroverted feelings motivation to get things done. I could see them seeing like a level of productivity increasing and getting things handled. And so that the ISFP is actually finding their life to some extent sort of sponsored. Because for an ISFP, usually you want to be in your art, whatever that looks like. Now, I'm not trying to indicate that all ISFPs are like traditional artists, but frequently they want to be in some sort of artistic expression, whatever that looks like. It could be all the way from carpentry to acting or whatever it is.
Business even could be their art.
Exactly. Business could be your art. But the ENFJ helps facilitate all of that, I'm sure. I mean, I love having ENFJs around. Like I get so much done because they're just handling all the details around me, and it's amazing. And they're anticipating my needs, and it's incredible. So when the ISFP rusts into that extraordinary ability, then being able to really appreciate what their spouse brings to the table.
I think from a practical standpoint, though, for you and your husband, and you might have tried some of these, but these are some things. If you're listening, you're an ENFJ. I've noticed that what extroverted feeling or harmony does really well is you have this goal of getting people's needs met in the moment. So let's say there's a situation, and I don't know your exact situation, but let's say the kids it's after school and you're trying to get dinner ready and things are happening, and your ISFP husband comes to you and says, this is really important to me that I go, do this thing with the car, and I need everybody to like arrange themselves around what I need to have happen right now. Remember that authenticity person, the ISFP, isn't taking into account all the things you're taking into account. So just understanding that you have more of everyone's needs on your radar than they do lets you know that their intent is not to be hijacking the experience of getting those people's needs met. And one thing you can do, I've noticed extroverted feeling primary people do this. They literally will use this word, and you can use whatever makes sense for you, but let's put a pin in that. I think that's right. We do need to get that need met too. Can you help me right now? Because right now I have this thing going on to get the family need met or this situation happening. Can we work together for that first? And then I will watch the kids later so you can get that thing met, or I'll make this thing happen so you can get that piece met for you. So it's not that you're saying your need is irrelevant or I'm not going to take it into account. It's just right now is not the best time. Here's how that works for me. I want to make sure everybody's handled first, and then I will totally help get that need met too. So what I've loved about ENFJs and what they're able to do is they're able to sequence getting needs met in a sophisticated way when they get really good at this and saying, here's the priority. And if you can communicate that, find ways to communicate that to your husband, it will really hopefully help him to understand what's going on for you. If you have language for it now, you can say, here's what's happening for me, what's so important to me. It's not that I'm disregarding what your needs are. It's though I have a priority of needs from a sense of urgency that I've got to tend to first. I think that would really help. For me as an authenticity user, I'm not an ISFP, but when someone does that for me, somebody that does lead with the harmony process, it really helps me understand, oh, okay, I see what you're doing here. I don't feel so personal, like they're just disregarding what I need in the moment. Again, I don't know your specific conflicts there, but that's an example of a potential conflict that might arise.
I've also noticed that for a lot of ENFJs, actually just people who use extroverted feeling in general, there can be a feeling like, because they're trying to get other people's needs met so often, and frequently they're in ways that are details that other people don't recognize until that thing doesn't happen. Like, you don't know the dishes are being done until suddenly the dishes are not being done, and then they're piling up. So for a lot of people who are using extroverted feeling, if you're in a relationship with somebody who uses this function, a little appreciation goes a long way, just acknowledging. And I've noticed, like, so your parents are, your dad's an ISFP and your mom's not an ENFJ, she's an INFJ, but it's a pretty similar relationship. And what I've noticed is that your dad, because his passion is in his ministry, right? He has this youth camp and they've been doing this ministry for a really super long time, and he's so in it, and it's like, it's his passion, and he's there every day, all day, and she's been supporting him forever. In fact, I would say that she's a secret weapon. And it's easy for him to forget about that. It's easy for him to take the things that she does for granted. But I've noticed that he's almost built in, like, almost like a system, oddly enough, of making sure that he regularly appreciates her through cards and through gifts. Now, I'm not 100% sure if your mom's love language is gift giving. So I think she definitely appreciates that he does it. But if you are an ISFP in a relationship with somebody who uses extroverted feeling, one of the highest leverage things that you can do to just maintain your relationship and like have it as good as it can possibly be is discover the love language of your partner and make sure that you are regularly showing appreciation in the way that they receive appreciation. That will go a very long way. And there probably will be a lot less, like you might, if you feel like somebody's breathing down your back or they're always on you to try to get things done, which is a common ISFP complaint. It's not 100%, but it's fairly common. A lot of it could be that the other person doesn't feel appreciated. And so all the work they do, they feel like they should be farming it out to you too, because you clearly don't appreciate what they're doing. And so why aren't you also doing this? If you can't feed it back, if you can't create a system of reciprocity, then why am I doing this for you? And I'm not saying like, say thank you to get somebody off your back. I mean, the gratitude that you feel, that you sincerely feel when you think about all the things that the person in your life is doing for you, make sure that you take those moments of gratitude to express them. And what you'll find is you'll find a lot less bitterness around it, or maybe a feeling of like, it's unsustainable for me to do it for you, so you need to be doing it instead. And for an ISFP, sometimes that gets overwhelming. Just the idea of some of those details can be somewhat overwhelming. So make sure that you're putting a lot of gratitude into the equation. The second thing I want to mention is beyond the dominant process, you guys are actually sharing the same, what we call polarity of extroverted sensing and introverted intuition as your perceiving processes, but they're in reverse. So for an ENFJ, introverted intuition, or what we call perspectives, is in the co-pilot or the auxiliary position. And then extroverted sensing, or what we call sensation, is in the 10-year-old or tertiary position. And just reverse that for ISFPs. Sensation is actually in the co-pilot, and perspectives is in the in the 10-year-old position. So you guys are actually, you've got an interesting, because you share this polarity, you've got an interesting simpatico on that as well, about seeing things through the lens of this polarity. Things are oftentimes based on your immediate experience, leading to some interesting insights and ahas, and vice versa. So that is a good thing, because you guys can understand each other on that level. But it also presents some challenges because you're going to be utilizing these functions, these cognitive functions, slightly differently. You might be coming up with different insights, or you might be desiring different experiences. And so that could easily be solved through some conversation. You would want to be sensitive about the doubling down of the insight you have, because the other person might actually be seeing something that you're not seeing. And yet it'll feel like you guys should be agreeing, since you're using the same filters. You should be agreeing on all this stuff, but sometimes you simply will not. And it will be tough to not try to force the other person to see your perspective and basically insist that they come to your conclusion. That might be a little difficult. Now, I don't know if this is the case in this particular dynamic, but I could see that coming up. And the best principle to implement, no matter what your relationship is, no matter what cognitive function stack you're using. But in this particular situation, I would say the best principle to use is from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where he says, seek first to be understood, seek first to understand before being understood. That is a tough thing to do. It is a discipline. It is a lifestyle choice. You have to really very conscientiously change your whole life to implement this strategy, but it is a very powerful one.
What that looks like is something happens with your husband. He says something and it may be triggering to you, or you guys are in a deep conversation and you can say to him literally these words: what I hear you saying to me, this is what I'm hearing from you. This is what I'm hearing you say back to me. And then repeat back how you interpreted what he said. And that'll allow him to then get some more clarity. If you misinterpreted, or he perceives you misinterpreting that, he can then bring more clarity to that. I know that we use that in our dynamic when we're kind of in a struggle in our marriage. Like if we're in a struggle in our marriage, if we're like, in a heated discussion, one of us will stop and go, okay, what I'm hearing you say is this. Am I correct on understanding what you're actually saying here? And that's just that alone can prevent like 90% of fights and arguments and conflict, because a lot of times it's just a breakdown in we're misunderstanding what the person intended to communicate to us. So I think that's just a quick technique to do what Stephen Covey's talking about.
And the final piece is looking at the inferior process that you both share, that it's a thinking process, but again, it's in different attitudes. For the ENFJ, it's introverted thinking. For the ISFP, it's extroverted thinking. Now, while these might be inferior or 3-year-old processes for you, they're still going to whisper in your ear. And there may be, I don't know if this is accurate or the case for you guys, but I could see coming up in that dynamic when you think you're right about something, when you think your data is good, or when you think something should be done in a certain way. I could see one of you trying to go, like the ENFJ, trying to go to the information, and the ISFP trying to go to the results, and then having fights over about whether or not your information is good, because you're coming at even your information, your data, you're even coming at from 2 different worlds. So, and these won't be as obvious because these are the things that whisper in our ear. So sometimes they create negative or toxic, dynamics in the relationship without our even being able to put our finger on it. So really understanding each other's cognitive function stack can be very powerful in trying to figure out where are we disagreeing? What is causing fights? Can I hold space for how the other person is wired? One of the biggest things you can do, we recently, I guess it's been a couple months now, but we had a podcast with our friend Bruce Music, who talked about relationships. And if you haven't heard that podcast, I highly recommend that you go back and listen to it. He said that usually fighting and problems in relationships is not a communication issue. It's a connection issue. And what's great about that is while understanding each other's function stacks can be helpful in the middle of confusion or as you're designing your life to make sure that you're both getting your needs met and accommodated, what's great about that is it doesn't matter what personality type the two of you are. Because the best way to get back into connection has nothing to do with conversation. It has everything to do with amping up your intimacy. And his recommendation was to, if you are in a time period like this, actually, we're doing this and we're not in a struggling time period. When you first wake up in the morning or right before you go to bed, you spend 5 minutes looking into each other's eyes. That's all you do. You put on a timer and you don't say anything, you don't touch, you just look in each other's eyes. And it can get a little awkward sometimes, especially if there's been stuff coming up for the two of you in your relationship. Sometimes people start laughing, sometimes people start crying. It can be very powerful, but the point of it is to continue to build that intimacy, not just the communication. The communication will follow. You will be more gentle with each other if you feel truly intimately connected. So my recommendation is to go check out that podcast. And if you don't have time to do that, at least implement that 5-minute eye gazing rule. And it's been pretty transformative in our household.
So the second part to your question was about ENFJ, ESFJ relationships, like that 1-letter difference between the N and the S. What does that mean? How does that express itself? I actually want to put a pin in this, to borrow a phrase I used earlier, and let's talk about this on the next PHQ. Let's make this into a 2-parter, and let's go into the differences there to answer that question as well. So We will see you on the next episode of PHQ. If you've got a question for us, one of the best places to go and ask your question is over at personalityhacker.com/questions. There's 2 ways to ask. You can write your question in. My preference is you record an audio for us so we can actually edit the audio directly into the PHQ. We can hear your voice, hear your question. Just make sure you got a really good mic or phone you're using to record a really great audio and keep it really short. You know, a nice tight question, about 30 seconds or less, would be really helpful for us. And we'd love to hear from you. What are your questions? So head over to personalityhacker.com/questions. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And you've been listening to PHQ Questions from the Personality Hacker community. We'll talk with you on the next episode.